If Christianity is true, everything about it can be proven with just this one prophecy.
All right, let's see it. And also the fit today is Todd McFarlane's Spawn #1 cover.
Isaac Newton said that this prophecy was so accurate that everything that can be said about Christianity can be proven, and it's so clear and it's so concise. God told Daniel in a prophecy 500 some years before Christ was even born that it would be 173,880 days from this decree to rebuild the temple until Messiah arrives. And that's exactly the day that Jesus arrived in Jerusalem. We can prove this through historical records. So there's no one else ever that could ever be the Messiah. Only Jesus of Nazareth was there on that day to fulfill that prophecy. It's absolutely mind-blowing and amazing.
So this is a reference to the prophecy of 70 weeks at the end of Daniel chapter 9, and the notion that this can, much less has to, be about Jesus is entirely implausible for a number of different reasons. To begin, this reads far more precision into this prophecy than is rational, because we've got a reference to 70 weeks, to 7 weeks, to 62 weeks, to a week, and to a half a week of years. And this kind of symbolic language is found in other Greco-Roman period Jewish literature, and it's always inconsistent and can refer to different periods of time even within the same text. So the best we can do is say we seem to be renegotiating Jeremiah's prophecy about the length of the exile. And when you look at the apocalyptic parts of Daniel and you look at the historical circumstances that they seem to be referring to, it always puts us in the early 160s BCE, the persecutions under Antiochus IV Epiphanes. And then right around the time that the Maccabees restore temple worship is where the prophecies are entirely inaccurate. And so that seems to be right around when the author is writing and they're kind of hoping for God to come and deliver them immediately following, which does not happen. And this is why the prophecies are less accurate earlier in time and less detailed, and then get more accurate and more detailed as you get closer to the early 160s BCE. So if you take Jeremiah's initial prophecy and 605 BCE as the beginning of these 62 weeks, you end up at 171 BCE, where the Anointed One is supposed to be cut off. And that's when the high priest Onias III was killed. And immediately following, Jewish communities entered into what First Maccabees calls a covenant with the Seleucid Empire. And that would last for 7 years, until the Maccabees restored temple sacrifice. And about halfway through those 7 years, in 167 BCE, that's when Antiochus IV Epiphanes put a stop to temple sacrifices in Jerusalem. So that period is the best fulfillment of what this prophecy sees as the culmination of everything that's going on. Now, again, this prophecy is not historical. It's going back to a period that it does not understand very well, and it's making up characters. There was never any figure known as Darius the Mede. Attempts to try to identify it with a historical figure from that time period fall to pieces, and it's certainly not Darius the Great. So that is fiction. Now, this video wants to say we can calculate this down to the day, and there are problems with how that is calculated. To begin, it interprets Daniel 9:25 to be saying 7 weeks and 62 weeks together. But that's not what we arrive at if we read the Hebrew text, which has an atnach between the 7 weeks and the 62 weeks, which means a sense unit is coming to an end and a new sense unit is beginning. But the Old Greek kind of garbled that, and the recension of Theodotion in the middle of the 2nd century CE put them together, 7 weeks and 62 weeks, adding them together. And that is how Jerome translated the Latin Vulgate, and that's what's been authoritative within Christianity ever since. But that's a misreading. It's not intending to add the two together. It's intending to keep them separate. And so already we're off to a bad start. But then 173,880 days is taking 69 weeks of years that are exactly 360 days long, which does not take into account intercalation. In the traditional Jewish calendar, every 2 or 3 years you would have an extra month being added. In the periods when this text was written, in the Greco-Roman period, they had different conventions of intercalation, which usually were kind of arbitrarily throwing in days between the end of the calendar and the beginning of the next calendar year. So it's not taking account of that. But we also have to figure out when we're starting the measuring. this video says it starts with the decree to rebuild the temple, but that's not actually what the text says. It says the word went out to restore and rebuild. And in verse 23, when it says the word went out, it's explicitly referring to God's word going out. So is this a reference to a decree or to a prophecy? If it's a prophecy, is it Jeremiah's prophecy in 605? Is it one of Daniel's prophecies under Darius the Mede? We don't know for sure. But if we decide, let's just say it's a decree, which decree and when? There are two different decrees that are mentioned in the Bible. We have that of Cyrus the Great, which is supposed to be somewhere around 539 BCE, and the temple is rebuilt between 520 and 515 BCE. But then if we go to Nehemiah 1, which apologists here are doing, we have a decree under Artaxerxes, which they date to around 444 BCE. Neither of these decrees seem to be historical, and even if they were, we wouldn't be able to date them any more precisely than a rough year. And this video wants us to be able to date them to a precise day, which we simply cannot do. And so the trick is to start with the date you want to be the fulfillment of the prophecy, and then count backwards, and then make a case that whatever date you land on in the past is where the prophecy was intended to start the whole time. And there's just no case to make for that, because this prophecy is about the persecutions in the early 160s BCE under Antiochus IV Epiphanes, and absolutely not about Jesus Christ.